Good morning. Let's begin a Freilich and Purim to everyone. So today's daf is Lamed Aleph. Lamed Aleph. You know what a zuchus it is to learn the Daf Yomi on Purim, because the Gemara says that when the pasuk in the Megillah says Kimu v'kiblu ha'Yehudim, that the Jews literally Kimu, they upheld v'kiblu, and they accepted upon themselves. So the Gemara says that the salvation of Purim led to almost like a second Kabbalah Satorah, and specifically a strengthening in the acceptance and observance of Torah Shabbal Peh. So what an amazing idea that the way we start off Purim Day is by learning a little bit of Torah Shabbal Peh. But we'll speak more about Purim later. So the Gemara says Gufa, first line on Lamed Aleph 31a. Gufa Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda said, Moder. So remember again, the topic that we're in the middle of over here is the topic of, we'll call it simultaneous liability. And this idea ultimately, again, of becoming liable for two acts, or I should say, for two punishments generated by the same act. And whether or not everyone agrees that if there's simultaneous liability, then we say kimle b'derabamine. But if the liabilities are generated in a non-simultaneous fashion, then lamaisi would be chayiv twice. It says the Gemara Gufa Amar Rav Chisda, Mod Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana begonev chabo shel chaveiro va'ochlo. So Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana agrees that if you steal the chalev, the forbidden fat of your friend, and you eat it, meaning not the forbidden fat that belongs to your friend, and you eat it, shu chayiv, that you are chayiv. Why? Shekvar neschayiv be'gneva kodem shiavu l'dei isra chalev. Because also remember again, that is not an act of simultaneous liability, because the two liabilities actually are generated at different times. I become chayiv for gneva when? At the moment that I take possession of the item, but I don't become chayiv for the chalev until I actually go ahead and swallow the chalev. So that would be a case where, again, I would be chayav for both the theft as well as the chalev consumption. So the Gemara says, Leima pligid Rabbi Avin. So could it be that Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana argues on Rabbi Avin? What did Rabbi Avin say? Am Rabbi Avin hazorek chetz mitchilas arba lesof arba. Both says a very interesting case. We had this in Masechah Shabbos. Someone shoots an arrow from the beginning of Dalet Amos until the end of Dalet Amos. Listen to this. I shoot an arrow. So my range isn't all that far. I'm a beginner. Right? So it goes Dalet Amos. But in the course of that Dalet Amos, Vikara Shirain Bahalichaso, and I go ahead and I tear silk in the course of the trajectory of that arrow. So remember again, I've done two things over here. I've moved an item for Amos in Rosh Hashanah, which is an act of hotzar, act of carrying, and I've also gone ahead and destroyed someone's property. So what's the halacha? So Rabbi Avin says potter. Now Rabbi Avin says potter. Sha'akira tzorech hanochahi. Because again, Rabbi said, listen to this. So at first glance, before that last statement, we would have assumed, based on everything we've learned, that lemaisa a person would be potter for such an act. That a person would be potter for such an act. Why would a person be potter for such an act? That a person would be chayiv. I'm sorry. Because there are two different liabilities here. There's the act of Chilul Shabbos, and we would have assumed that when does Chilul Shabbos actually occur? When does Chilul Shabbos occur? Only when the arrow comes to rest after Dalet Amos. That's when Chilul Shabbos occurs. But Lemaisa, again, the destruction of my friend's silk occurs when? Literally as the arrow is flying through. So I would have thought that therefore I would be chayiv twice. But yet Rabbi Avin says, no, I'm only chayiv for the violation of Shabbos, i.e. skila, and I'm exempt for the financial damage perpetrated upon my friend. So the Gemara, why? Because he says, Sha'akira tzorech hanochahi. Because akira, the uprooting of the object, literally is tzorech hanocha, is a part and parcel of the item coming to rest. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Sha'akira tzorech hanochahi. Hilchach afagav dechiv mamon mikame hanocha asilei. Even though financial liability comes before the item actually comes to rest, and therefore we would have thought Chilul Shabbos, Oben Akira v'Hanocha Asile Misa v'Tashlumin Bayin Ke'echad. I'm reading Rashi. Sha'akira tzorech hanochahi u'miahi shaita aschal Allah malacha. Both is very interesting. So remember, the two bookends of an act of hotzah on Shabbos are Akira, an uprooting an object from a state of rest, and Hanocha, the object coming to rest. So one would have thought that those are two different things. They're not. they're considered to be one simultaneous action. Because since, again, Lamaisa, an item can't come to rest without an Akira, and ultimately, again, every Akira is going to result in a Hanacha, therefore it's considered to create one continuum. Therefore, listen to what Rabbi Avin says. Therefore, Rabbi Avin says, when you pick up the arrow, you shoot it, it goes through the silk and it comes to rest, that is considered to be a simultaneous act, all one action. So therefore, again, the tearing of the silk is considered to be occurring in the midst, or I should say during the Akira, which by definition is part of the Hanacha. So you have the Akira Hanacha, which are two parts but are really one. Sandwich in the middle, again, over there, the tearing of the silk. You have simultaneous liability, and therefore remember, simultaneous liability then triggers Kimlei B'derabamine, which means you will only be chayiv for Shabbos, you will not be chayiv for the silk. So the
chiyuv comes later, though. The chiyuv misa comes when it rests.
No, but that's the whole chap. The whole chap is that Akira is Sarach Hanacha. Therefore, to a certain degree, as soon as you do the Akira, right, it's almost as if halachically the Hanacha has been done. Obviously, you can't say the Hanacha has been done until the halacha has actually been done, but because they are two parts of the virtually the same act, therefore there's simultaneity. Even though you are technically correct, the liability doesn't come until later on. So the Gemara goes weiter. Hachanami, why don't they say over here also, Hagba tzarach achilahi? Why don't they say same thing? If I steal my friend's chaylev, so I can't eat without Hagba, right? I can't eat without lifting it up. So the act of lifting it up is the beginning of achila. So I should say there's simultaneous liability there also, because that one act of lifting it up represents gneva, represents theft, and also goes ahead and represents the beginning of achila. To which the Gemara says, no. The Gemara says, no, it's not a good comparison. On Shabbos, an item could only come to rest if what? If there was an akira first. Meaning, I will say again that when the item is traveling, the only way it comes to rest is if there was first an akira. There's no such thing as a hanacha without an akira. On the other hand, hacha afshar la'achila below hagba. But I will say in the chaylev case, you can have consumption without lifting up the object. How? Di'iboi gachin va'achil. Because what could you always do? You could always bend down and go. I gave you that. That was a Purim bonus. My illustration of this, right? You could go ahead. You could bend over and you could go ahead and grab the food like that without actually ever having to do hagbah. Therefore, again, you can't claim that the act of hagbah is by definition the beginning of achila, since achila by definition could occur without hagbah, as opposed to hanacha, which cannot occur without what? Which cannot occur without akira. Inami, hasam. Furthermore, there's another distinction. Hasam iboy lahadura lo matzi mehadula. Furthermore, I will say in the case of the arrow, the reason why we say akira sarach hanacha, because once you let go of that arrow, what can't you do? You can't pull it back. Hacha, and therefore, that's why I could say that akira is tchilas hanacha, because once I release that arrow, which essentially is my akira, once I do that, then by definition, again, I have triggered an irreversible process. So it makes sense to link those two bookends as one. However, again, hacha matzi mahadala. But I will say when I pick up the chaylev, so it's not like there's some irreversible process that's been initiated. That means I have to eat the chaylev. If I choose to put down the chaylev, I could choose to put down the chaylev. Therefore, again, you don't have that same simultaneity. So the Gemara says, "Ma'ika bein haylish and al-haylish." And I both say, so now we just had two explanations as to why the case in Shabbos is different than the chaylev. Remember again, the chaylev case is Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana, and Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana said that even in the chaylev case, you will go ahead and you'll be chayiv twice. You're chayiv once for the act of theft and once for chaylev consumption, because there is no simultaneity. Because the act of theft is accomplished when I pick up the item, but the prohibition on chaylev is not transgressed until when? Until I swallow the chaylev. As opposed to the case on Shabbos, when I release the arrow and it travels dalaramas, and in the midst of those dalaramas it cuts through my friend's silk, I will only be chayiv for chilul Shabbos, not for the tearing of the silk, because there is simultaneous liability. So the Gemara now said, so the Gemara said there, the Gemara just phrased two different distinctions between the chaylev case and the Shabbos case. In the chaylev case, the first distinction was The first distinction was that in the chaylev case, you can't have the hanacha without the akira, right? But again, in the achila case, in the chaylev case, you could have achila without akira by just bending over to eat it. And number two, in the arrow case, once you've initiated that process, you cannot take it back, as opposed to the chaylev case in which you can. So the Gemara now will say, now both of those lashonos are just illustrating the same a distinction between chaylev and Shabbos. But the Gemara is intrigued. Mai ika bein haylishna lahayn nishla. Is there some fundamental distinction between this lashon and that lashon? To which the Gemara says, ika beinayhu. The Gemara says, I'll tell you a distinction. Hama'avir sakin birshus harabim v'kara shira'in b'halichasa. Well, so listen to this. Let's say instead of going ahead and shooting an arrow, I'm carrying a knife. And I'm going ahead, I'm holding the knife like this, and I'm walking Dalit Amis in Rishus Harabim. So what's the halacha? Lahach lishna. So now the shayla is like this. I'm walking Dalit Amis, and as I'm walking Dalit Amis, what do? I cut right through my friend's silk. So the shayla now is what? Am I chayiv? So the Gemara says, well, it depends. Lahach lishna da amrit efshar lahanacha b'lo akira. So according to the first lashon that said that the novelty of the Shabbos case is that once the akira was initiated, it becomes one simultaneous process with the hanacha. And Rabbosai, the chap over here is, therefore, because akira and hanacha are one, therefore anything that occurs between akira and hanacha is one with the akira and the hanacha. See, if you say that once he picked up the item, therefore by definition, the hanacha is as if it's about to occur or as if it has occurred. Because there is no akira without hanacha, or there is no hanacha without akira. So hachanami efshar hanacha b'lo akira. So I'll say I would make that same argument in this case over here, that once he goes ahead and starts walking with the knife, that's an akira. Then by definition, again, we know the next step is going to go ahead and be hanacha. Therefore, again, it's as if those two acts are occurring together. Bless you. And therefore, anything that happens in the middle. All right, enough. That's it. Right? Therefore, again, anything that comes up in the middle, by definition, is considered to occur simultaneously with the act of Chil Shabbos, and therefore Abi Chayiv. However, lahach lishna da amrit lo matzi mehadir. But according to the second lashon that said that the novelty by the Shabbos case is that once you release the arrow, you cannot get it back, as opposed to the Chaylev case, then this case does not resemble that. Why? Because in that respect, this case resembles more the Chaylev case. Hachi matzah mehadir. See, in this case, when I'm carrying the knife, if I want to go ahead and stop this process from occurring, I absolutely have the ability to do so. Fine. So the Gemara goes weiter. I want to just be clear. What's interesting to note is, if you notice, we haven't really had any machlokes over here, because what everyone's agreeing on is the following idea. There is a concept of kimlei b'derabimine that everyone's agreeing to. Therefore, again, if you do an act and that act generates two liabilities, one death and one financial, you're only subject to death, but you're not subject to the financial penalty. The truth is, the one machlokes we have. Actually, 1 second. However, again, everyone also agrees that is only true if what? If the two liabilities are generated simultaneously. Everyone will agree that if they're not generated simultaneously, that's why the chaylev case is a good case. I steal my friend's chaylev and eat it, because the act of theft and the act of consumption don't necessarily. Now remember, you can structure a case where they occur at the same time, but they don't have to occur at the same time. Therefore, I'll be chayiv twice. The only case, by the way, so far where we've seen any machlokes is to whether or not kimlei b'derabimine only applies to misa bidei adam, or does it also apply to kares and misa bidei shamayim. But other than that, the nice part of this sugya is pretty much we're on the same page. So it says the Gemara Gufa. Rabbi Avin said, Azari chetz mitchilas arba l'sof arba. If someone threw an arrow, this is just quoting the case we had earlier. If someone throws an arrow from the beginning of Dalet Amos to the end of Dalet Amos, meaning one goes ahead and literally shoots an arrow Dalet Amos, Vikara Shirain. And he went ahead and he tore silk in the midst of the process. Vikara Shirain Balichaso, Potter. And he went ahead and he tore silk in the midst of the trajectory of the arrow. So he's Potter. Sha'akira tzorech hanachi. So we'll say this is just restating what we said before. Why? Because since akira, by definition, is the prerequisite of hanacha, therefore once the akira has been initiated, it's as if the hanacha has begun as well. And therefore, lemaisa, anything that occurs between akira and v'hanacha is considered to occur at the same time as Akira v'hanacha. Therefore, I will be exempt for the tearing of my friend's silk, because instead I'll be chayiv v'chil Shabbos. So Masiv Rav Bibi Bar Abaye. So Rabbi Bar Abaye asked the kasha, Hagonev kis b'Shabbos chayiv. If one goes ahead and steals, I steal my friend's wallet on Shabbos, I am chayiv. Rashi says, now what's the case over here? Look at Rashi. Hagonev kis b'Shabbos, higbil b'rishus habaylim. I lifted up the wallet in my friend's rishus, v'otzio l'rishus harabim, and I took it out to rishus harabim. So I'm chayiv b'tashlumin, af al pi shenerag. So we'll say, in this case, I will be chayiv to repay my friend, even though what? I will also be chayiv to a death penalty for violating Shabbos, for transferring an item from a private domain to a public domain. Why? What's the logic? Because we'll say this is the same thing as the chaylev case. Because I am liable for geneva, for theft, even before I violated Shabbos, because Rabbi says Rashi, when do I violate Geneva? Shari kvar neschai b'Geneva l'shalim dagba kone b'chol makom the kamla b'shusei aflis chai bonsim. Because Rabbi remember, if I'm a thief and I go into my friend's house to steal his wallet, at what point in time do I acquire, quote unquote, acquire his wallet? When I pick it up. Now I will say, you should know this actually, when we get to the Babas, we'll discuss this, because this is an interestingly contested idea as to whether or not a thief actually acquires an item in the reshus of the owner of the item. But for now, the Gemara is making the assumption that if I'm a thief, I go into my friend's house and I steal his wallet, as soon as I do Hagbah, I lift up that wallet, I have acquired that wallet as a thief. Which I will say, by the way, which means that Rashi also just pointed this out, that I'm chayiv for onsin, which means that technically speaking, let's say again, there's a flash flood then that destroys everything in the house, including the contents of the wallet. So I can't say, well, technically I never took it off your property. It's your wallet, it's your loss. No. Once I pick it up, I am the thief, and therefore I am responsible. So also I'm chayiv twice in this case. Why? Because like we said before, because the chayiv geneva comes about at the time that I lift it up. But yet chil Shabbos only occurs when? When I go from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, 2 different times. No simultaneity. Therefore I'm chayiv twice. However, on the other hand, megarer v'yotze. Now, this is an interesting case. Let's say I wasn't carrying the wallet. Instead, I never lifted it up. Instead, I just go ahead and I drag it. So let's say he's got a fanny pack. They're coming back, right? So I go ahead. He's got a fanny pack filled with bills. So nobody wants to wear one of those, even a thief, right? So what happens? So I'm carrying it. I'm sorry. I apologize to the fanny pack wearers among us. So what happens? I drag it out. Now here's the interesting case. If I'm dragging it, then there is simultaneous liability. Why? Because remember, if I'm not doing hagbah, if I haven't lifted up the object, then there's Mashicha, right? Mashicha. But Mashicha only works when what? When you're transferring the item into a different reshus. So therefore, again, I only acquire the object for Geneva purposes once it crosses into the Reshus Harabim. But that's also the same time that I become chayav for Shabbos. So there is simultaneous liability. So hayam megarer v'yotze potter. In that case, I am exempt from from compensating the owner. Why? Shari isur Shabbos v'isur Geneva b'ayin ka'echad. Because we'll say in that case there is simultaneous liability. Because remember again, the act of dragging Rabbosai is I'm acquiring it by Mashicha. You could acquire an item by Mashicha by pulling it towards you, but we're going to see now that Mashicha only works when you pull it into a different reshus. Therefore, in this case, there is simultaneous liability. Geneva and Chilul Shabbos occur at the same moment that the wallet crosses over the threshold of the house, which is Yachid into Rosh Hashanah, and therefore I am potter for the money because I'm chayiv for a death penalty. Va'amai, but why is that? Hachanami lema hagba sorech hotzahi. Right, but why don't I say the following? Why don't we say over here that Hagbah is Tzarech Chotzah? Now, we'll say, Rashi's going back, look at Rashi says, Va'amai, ki yigbiu b'shus habaylim, v'kuno, amai chayiv, neima mishas Hagbah, aschala lahotzah. Now, also going back to the first case where I lifted up the wallet. So if we say that Akira Tzarech Hanacha, so that means every single time I do an Akira, that in essence links me and is the beginning of the Hanacha. It's one simultaneous act. Well, if that's the case, then even in the situation where I lift up the wallet, we'll call him in Ruvain's house, really, I should say, that the act of Chilul Shabbos and the act of Geneva do in fact what? occur simultaneously, and therefore I should be exempt for financial compensation. To which the Gemara says, no, hacha ma'askinon. What's the case over here? Sheigbiu amenas lahatznio v'nimlach alav v'hotzio. We'll say this is very interesting. What's the case? The case over here is where I lifted it up originally with the thought that I was going to hide it, meaning, maybe I'm just an amateur thief, but I figured, you know what, I can't get this out of the house now. Let me hide it somewhere. Reuven's not going to find it, and I'll come back another time to go ahead and claim it. So when I did the akira was not done with the intent to go ahead and transfer the item into Rosh Hashanah. Rather, it was done to keep the item in Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, again, that's not an akira, that's l'tzarech hanacha in Rosh Hashanah. And then what happened? I changed my mind. Now, here's the interesting part. Now, when I changed my mind, what happens? So here, interestingly enough, this is a case of an act of hotzah that does not have a real akira. Right? Because again, remember, the akira that I did was for the purpose of keeping the item within Rishus Hayachid itself. Once I'm holding the object, I change my mind and I decide that I want to take it somewhere else. But Lamai said there's been no akira for the sake of a hanocha in Rishus Harabim. And therefore, again, what the Gemara is suggesting, that's why there will be no simultaneous liability. But one second, are you chayiv at all in such a situation? Meaning, I will say, what the Gemara is asking over here is, forget about simultaneous liability. Would you even be chayiv for otzah in a case like this, where akira was done with one intention, but hanacha was done with another intention? After all, we learned v'ha'amar of Simon. Rabbi Abi, Rabbi Yochanan, Hamefane chafatzim chafetzim izavis lezavis. If one is rearranging his furniture on Shabbos, v'nimlach aleihem, and then he makes a decision to take them out into Rosh Hashanah, votzion, and I take it out. So I'm moving my vase from one table to the next table, and I say, I don't even want it, and I take it out with the intention to put it by the curb. Granted, that's not a good case. That's an innocuous case. I decided I didn't want to be Mechal Shabbos, so I go ahead and I take the vase out to Rosh Hashanah. What's that halacha? Potter. A potter. Why? Because remember, in order to go ahead and violate Hotzah on Shabbos, you need an akira and hanacha for the same purpose. If the akira was done for a particular purpose, and then once I'm holding the object, I change my mind, and then I go out to Rosh Hashanah, I don't have an akira. So in that case, again, says the Gemara, you'd be potter for Shabbos altogether. So the Gemara says, Lo tema amanas latznio, ela ima amanas lahotzio. No. Scratch that. Rather, again, the thief in this case, when he picked up the object, his intention was to take it out to Rosh Hashanah. But 1 second. So now we're back to square one. If his intention was to take it out to Rosh Hashanah, and if we said before that what? Akira tzorech hanacha, that when you do akira in an object, so that makes like the beginning of the hanacha, and anything that happens in between lamais again is considered to happen simultaneously with Chil Shabbos. If that's the case, then what? That I should be exempt for compensating Reuven for the theft, because the theft and the Chil Shabbos in reality occurred at the same time. Rather, the Gemara says, Hacham Haskinon, what's the case here? Kisha Amad. So we'll say this is very interesting. So what's the case over here? The case over here is where I picked up the object with the intention to go ahead and steal it, and even with the intention to take it out to Rosh Hashanah, but then I stood still. So the Gemara says, look at Rashi. Hachama askina kisha amad va'amidaso hi hanacha la'akira rishona. And Rabbi say, once you stop moving, that's tantamount to what? That's tantamount to hanacha. So once you pick an object up, you walk and then you stop, by definition, that first akira has come to an end. So we'll say, watch this. Now what's the chap over? This is great. I mean, it's great for us, not good for this guy. But here, listen to this chap. So what happened? So I pick up the wallet, so I've done an akira. Now I will say, in that moment, what happens? I'm chayiv for gneva. So I walk and then I stop. Then I both say, once I stop, fine. Once I then start moving again, that's another akira, and that akira will ultimately result in what? In the hanacha in the Sarabim. So what do you see over here? It's two separate acts. The first akira was an akira for Geneva. Now that might not have been his intention at first, but ex post facto, that's what happened. The fact that he stopped walking afterwards, and then went ahead and made a hanacha. Therefore, again, he had an akira and hanacha. You don't need a hanacha, but he had an akira for the sake of theft, and then there was a second akira with a hanacha in Rosh Hashanah that allowed him to violate Shabbos. The Gemara says, well, 1 second. Amad lemai. Why did he stop? Ila kasef orchehu. So we'll say if he stopped to go ahead and just adjust the load, right? To just adjust whatever he's carrying, then that's orche, that's normal, and that's not called the hanacha. That's not called hanacha. That is meaning stopping to adjust whatever it is that you're carrying is still considered to be like you're moving. However, ela ba'omed lafush. Rather, it must be what? He's stopping to rest. Stopping to rest for a few moments, and therefore when you stop to rest, that's considered to be a hanacha, and therefore lemaisa again you have theft, therefore that has its own akira, and the chil Shabbos which will then have its own akira. Aval lekasef mai, but if you stop just to adjust your load, then what will be the halacha? To which the Gemara says pater. In such a case like that, you would be pater. So if that's the case, says the Gemara, that you can now make a distinction in two cases of stopping. That if you go ahead and you lift up the wallet to steal it, and then you stop to just adjust the wallet, so then you will not be, and then you go out into the Shram, so what will be the halacha? What will be the halacha? The halacha will be that you'll be pater for the wallet. Why? Because there was one akira, one hanacha, there's simultaneous liability, because the moment you picked up the wallet for Geneva is the moment that the akira of Shabbos and akira tzarech hanacha, simultaneity, therefore will be pater. But if you stop to go ahead and just take a breather, right? Theft can be hard work. You take a breather. So then again, lemaisa, then you had one akira for the sake of theft. Then there was a hanacha. Then there was a second akira for Shabbos. No simultaneous liability. You'll be chayiv twice. If that's the case, says the Gemara, adetani haya yotze migar v'yotze pater niflog v'nisnei b'didei. So also now the Gemara says, why did the Brisa have to have? Why did the Brisa set up the Reisha and Seifa as it did? Remember again, there are two cases in the Brisa. Case number one in the Brisa is where he picks up the object. Case number two in the Brisa is where he drags the object. Why don't you forget about that? Why don't you just make two cases in the Brisa where what? In both cases, he's carrying the object and make the following distinction. When is this true? Meaning, when is it true that there's simultaneous liability and you'll be exempt for the theft, but chayiv for Shabbos? When you stand still in order to rest, because that's not called the hanacha. Aval kasef pater. But if you go ahead and you stop in order to go ahead, I'm sorry, excuse me, I said the wrong thing. When is it true that lemaisa again you will not be chayiv twice? Right? Say it again. When is it true that you will be chayiv twice for the act of theft and the act of Shabbos? That's if you stand still in order to go ahead and rest, because then that first akira, which was the lifting up of the wallet, came to an end, and a second akira occurs afterwards. Avala kasef pater. But if you're just stopping in order to adjust your load, then that's still called movement. There's been no hanacha, and therefore you'll be pater because there will be simultaneous liability. Elahamani. So therefore, the Gemara is asking, why not just simplify the brisa? Elahamani. Whose opinion does this reflect? Ben Azahi. The Amr Mahalech Ka'omei Dami. So whose opinion does this reflect? And this is very interesting. The case, the Gemara says, it's like Ben Azai, who says that walking is like standing. So what does that mean? Look at Rashi over here. Mahalech, only Jews could say things like this, right? That walking is like standing. Look at Rashi. Mahalech Ka'omei Dami. This is actually very interesting. Va'akiras kol pesia, havya akira. V'hanachas haregel, hiya hanacha. Hilchach kanye mishas hagba, v'chiyev misa b'psia basraisa ka'asilei. So both say, Rabbi Ben Azai says that essentially every single time you step, that's an akira, and every single time your foot comes to rest, that's a hanacha. Now, how according to Ben Azai, you could ever have, let's say, a violation of Dalet Amos and Rosh Hashanah is an interesting discussion, not for today. But the idea says Ben Azai is of the opinion that Lamaisa, anytime you're omeid, anytime you stop, there's always an akira and a hanacha. Therefore, according to Ben Azai, you will be chayiv twice in this case. Why? Because Lamaisa, again, when you lifted up the wallet, so that was hagbah on the wallet, then you had an akira hanacha for the wallet, and the truth is you only violate Shabbos when the last step you take in the Rosh Hashanah is the akira, and the first time you put your foot down in Rosh Hashanah, that's the hanacha. So Ben Azai would say that in that kind of case of omeid, lemaisa, you would always be chayiv twice. To which the Gemara says zorik mai. But according to Ben Azai, if you were to go ahead and throw the object, then what would be the halacha? Rashi says higbio v'zarko. There would be the halacha. The Gemara says, pater. In that case, again, then you would be pater. Rashi says, pater mitashlumin da'asi lechiv Shabbos aydechiv hagba desu leka akira akrisi. Because they all say, then in that moment, again, everything is occurring simultaneously. In the time when you throw it, if I were to go ahead and take the object, steal the object, take the wallet, and then throw it out to Rosh Hashanah, then technically speaking, everything is occurring at the same time. And because there's one akira. There's an akira for Shabbos purposes. There's an akira for Geneva, a hagbah for Geneva Geneva purposes, everything there is being accomplished at once, so to speak, akira tzarach hanacha, and therefore I would only be chayiv for the violation of Shabbos. So if that's the case, niflog v'nisnei b'didei. So again, why not simplify the brisa? B'medram amurim b'mahalech. When is it true? When is it true that you will be chayiv both liabilities for theft as well as for stealing? That's when you're actually walking the object out of the house. Aval zorek pater. But if you were to go and throw it out of the house, then lemaisa again you would be pater again, pater for tashlum, pater for repayment, but you would be chayiv for. But you would be chayiv for Chil Shabbos. To which the Gemara says, no. Megarer v'yotze itzrichale. No, we need the case of megarer v'yotze. We need the case ultimately where you are dragging the object. Why? Sakadait amina ein derech hotzah b'kach. So I might have thought that lemaisa, that's not considered to be the normative way of taking the object out. I would have thought that perhaps supposed to say, you know what, I'm not chayiv in that case at all. You know why? Because who drags fanny pack, right? Who drags a wallet on the ground? Therefore, again, the Gemara says, Kamash Malon, no. Kamash that's not the case. Kamash that's considered to be a normative act of hotzah. So the Gemara says, well, one second, let's analyze this. Ubemai. When is it a normative act of hotzah? If it's a large wallet, a large fanny pack, then orchayu. Then of course, if it's heavy, it would be normal to drag it. And if it's small, that's not the normative way. Ella, what is it? So if it's not big and if it's not small, it's got to be Ella b'mitziyai. It's medium, right? It's kind of in the middle, not too big, not too small. So therefore, again, I will say what? Therefore, lemaisa again. Therefore, lemaisa, it is considered to be. It's not the usual, but it's also not unnormative, non-normative. It's not a non-normative way of going ahead and carrying it. So the Gemara says, now let's further complicate this. Where are you taking it out to? Meaning, again, remember, Boss says all the wallet case. I'm stealing the wallet. I'm moving it out into another rishus. Where am I taking it? If you're taking it out into the rishus harabim, if I'm dragging it out, then certainly there is a violation of Shabbos. But is there a violation of Geneva? Now, the Gemara says there's no Geneva. Why, Rabbosai? Because the Gemara is making an assumption over here that Mashiach only works when you pull the object into your rishus. But Mashiach does not work when what? When you pull an object into rishus harabim. So if it's Sarabim, then you'll have Isser Shabbos, but you won't have. Remember, Mashiach means the act of acquiring something by pulling it close to you. It only works, the Gemara says, if you pull it into your own Rishus. So the Gemara says, well, if you're pulling it into your Rishus HaYachid, Isser Geneva Ika, then what? There isn't Isser Geneva because you're pulling it into your Rishus, but because also, let's say this assumes, let's say I live next door to the person I'm stealing from. So if I pull it into my rishus, then there's an Isser Geneva. However, again, Isser Shabbos Leka. But I will say there's no violation of Shabbos. Why is there no violation of Shabbos? Because going from one rishus yachid to another rishus yachid, now granted that there is an Isser Derabanan in that case, but that's not going to generate the death penalty. Lo tzvicha da afki l'tzidir suram. I will say what's the case over here? I'm bringing the object from the domain of the owner to tzidei rishus harabim. The Rabbi said tzidei rishus harabim means the sides of the rishus harabim. Now Rashi says over here, tzidei rishus harabim samoch lebatim. This is close to the home. Shenosna la'alam min abatim avanim umechsholin laharchik tchiko chagalos meosin chifufei v'lifnim kart rishus harabim. So let's listen to this. So in what they would do is on the sides of the rishus harabim, they would put like these barriers. They would prevent the wagons from coming close to people's personal property. Now, technically speaking, this is what's called Tzidei Rishus Harabim is really Rishus HaYachid. It's really Rishus HaYachid. But look what the Gemara says. Ukiman, Ik Rabbi Eliezer Damer Tzidei Rishus Harabim Rishus Harabim Rav Damu. They're both saying that there's a machlokes as to what the status of Tzidei Rishus Harabim actually is. Rabbi Eliezer holds that Tzidei Rishus Harabim have the din of Rishus Harabim. If that's the case, Isser Shabbos Ika, Isser Geneva Leka. Then I will say, if I drag the wallet into there, I'll violate Shabbos. But again, I'm not going to violate Geneva because Mashiach only works if I pull it into Rosh Hashanah. And if it's like the rabbis who say that Tzidei Rishus Harabim is not like Rosh Hashanah, if that's the case, Isser Geneva Ika, then there'll be it. So I will say, if it's not like Rosh Hashanah, but it's like Rosh Hashanah, then again, there will be an Isser Geneva, but Isser Shabbos Leka, but there'll be no Isser Shabbos. To which the Gemara says, the Olam Kirabi Eliezer, really it's reflected of Rabbi Eliezer, and I will say when Rabbi Eliezer Eliezer says that these sides of Rosh Hashanah, remember, these are the sides of Rosh Hashanah. When he says it like Rosh Hashanah, Hani mili le'inyin chiyuva de Shabbos. That's in terms of Shabbos violation. That if you carry an object from your home into Tzidei Rosh Hashanah, you are chayiv for Shabbos violation. Why? Because Abosai, why? Because Lemaisa, very often, if the public thoroughfare gets congested, what will happen? Pedestrian traffic will spill into Tzidei Rishos Harabim. Therefore, again, for Shabbos purposes, it has the status ultimately again of Rishos Harabim. Now, what's interesting is even though title-wise, it's really more Rishos Hayachid. But since the Rabbim use it when there is public thoroughfare overcrowding, therefore it's called Rishos Harabim. However, Aval Inyan Mikna. But for financial purposes, meaning for acquiring items, if you need to transfer an item into a public domain, into a private domain, then this counts as a private domain as well. And therefore, again, according to Rabbi Eliezer, this case works. If I drag the wallet out, we'll call it from Ruvain's house, Ruvain's the owner, into Tzidei Rishos Harabim, so in that case, again, there can be simultaneous liability. Why? Because Lemaisa, again, the Tzidei Rishos Harabim on one hand can function like a Rishos Hayachid for Mashiach purposes, but like Rishos Harabim for Shabbos purposes, and therefore, again, there would be simultaneous liability. I'd be chayav for Shabbos, but exempt from repayment for the wallet. The Gemara says, my time in the my time. What's the reason why it works to acquire for financial purposes? Because although when there is an overflow of pedestrian traffic, people use Rishos Harabim, but that's not the common usage. So because it's not the common usage, therefore Lemaisa again is considered to be really for financial purposes a Rishos Hayachid. Ravashi says Kegon shetziref yado lemata mishlosha v'kiblo. Ravashi has another case. Ravashi says that the case over here is where I drag the item out. I drag the item out of Ruvain's home, but I can't. So I'm dragging it with my left hand. I keep my right hand within 3 amos. Not 3 amos. The 3 tefachim. Thank you. 3 tefachim of the ground, and I pull the item and it lands in my hand. So what does that do? So the Gemara says, Kidirava, do Amarava yodo sho adam chashuvalo ke'arba al arba. So we'll say in this case over here, what I'm doing is I'm transferring the item from Ruvain's home into my own private rishus. Okay. Ravacha masni hachi, Ravina masni. So Ravacha stated this discussion the way we just had it above. Ravina masni the olam da'afke Rishos Harabim. Ravina said, no, the case over here is where I'm taking the object out from Ruvain's home into Rishos Harabim. But that works for Shabbos violation, but it doesn't work by Mashiach. Rishos Harabim nami kana v'tarvai, and in Rishos Harabim you could also go ahead and bikona the object. Rabbi says, you know what we're going to do is we're going to stop over here. We're going to stop over here for today. Well, so again, I want to just point out, let's just say because I want to share with you just one quick Purim thought before we go into Davin. So just to understand where we're ending off. So we're stopping over here in the midst of this discussion of trying to figure out the case of simultaneity with theft as well as with as Chil Shabbos. Because the issue we're running into over here is there seems to be 2 separate criteria. Because now that we've established this as a case of Mashiach only works how? Mashiach only works if an item is transferred into another Rishos, into a private Rishos, into my Rishos. But if it's transferred into Rishos Harabim, then what? Then Lemaisa, I'm not chayav for Gezel. On the other hand, for Chil Shabbos, I'm only chayiv if I transfer it into Rosh Hashanah, not into Rosh Hashanah. So the Gemara is scrambling to try to figure out a way in which you can, in fact, have simultaneous liability for both Shabbos as well as for theft. So the Gemara just quoted over here by saying that Ravacha was fine with everything we said until now. Ravina is going to have a different interpretation, and we'll go ahead and we'll look at Ravina's interpretation tomorrow. So let me just end off with an amazing thing. I saw this last night, and I felt compelled to share it with you because it's absolutely beautiful. So there's a beautiful medrash in Esther Rabbah. I saw this quote in a Sefer Shvilei Pinchas. Is one of the Hasidim of the Belzer Rebbe. See, he says something amazing. He says, quotes, Al zed derech zu mavor b'sar makedoshim shem tzadikim lefarish ma shekasav b'Megillah. So he quotes the passage from the Megillah. Vayomer hamelach leEsther b'mishta yain ma she'ila seich v'yinasein lach. The king says to Esther, what during the Mishta Yain, during the celebration, ma she'ila seich, what do you want? And I'll give it to you. And look what the Medrash says. The Medrash says, Kistam melech b'Megillah romeis ala Kadosh Baruch Hu. Every time the Megillah says melech, we know the Medrash says that it means HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Medrash goes on to say, and in the Megillah, whenever it says Esther is remez al Knesses Yisrael. Esther ultimately again refers to Klal Yisrael. But Mishta Yayin, says the Medrash, refers to Purim. And therefore the Medrash and the Zohar quotes the same exact idea, that on Purim there is an incredible koach hatfilah. The Medrash says, "Vayomer hamelech leEsther b'mishta hayayin," that the king HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Esther Mishta Hayayin, today on Purim, Ma she'ila seich v'yinasin lach. Whatever you want, whatever you ask for, I will give you on this day. That's the koach of Purim, says the Medrash. And Rabbi say it's so important because often when we daven, we don't really give it a lot of thought. Whatever it is, we're already half of us are already at work already while we're still in the middle of davening. So it's hard. It's part of the nature of davening. But I will say, but today understand that there's an incredible koach hatfilah. Incredible. Make sure today that you ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for what you want. Make sure today you daven not just for yourselves and for your family, but you daven for Klal Yisrael. Make sure today the Melech is asking us, the Melech is telling us, we're Esther. Melech is telling us, Ma she'ila seich, just tell me what you want, and some way, somehow, v'yinasein lach, and I will give it to you. I will say, there are some things in life that you're crazy not to take advantage of, and that you're crazy not to try, because what's the word, right? Even if you're a little cynical, which some of us are, right? At the end of the day, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going ahead and saying that here you have a golden opportunity to reach out to me, so make sure today you daven, make sure today you don't miss a tefillah b'tzibor, make sure today that even Mariv, because Mariv sometimes gets a little bit lost in the fold over here, make sure that you daven Mariv b'kavana, make sure you daven Mincha b'kavana, even if you have to go to work today, you have to leave a little bit early from davening, make sure that whatever you are here for, you give it 100%. You daven with a leiv shalim, and we should all be zocher that on this day that the Melech says to us, "Ma she'ila seich v'yinasein lach." Let us hope that HaKadosh Baruch Hu answers our tefillos as yichidim, answers our tefillos as individuals, and halavai HaKadosh Baruch Hu should answer our tefillos as an am, and we should be zocher not to a salvation of Purim, but we should be zocher mir Hashem to a full geula shlema with the Melech HaMashiach b'mehera b'yameinu. Amen.